work that I'm going to present today is the opportunity assessment that we have carried out between Minirena, Government of Rwanda, IUCN and our colleagues from the World Resources Institute. Aurelio is from the World Resources Institute, and IUCN and the World Resources Institute have been working very closely together on this forest landscape restoration work. The government of Rwanda has also become a member of IUCN. Just to let you know how IUCN works, it's a membership, it's an international organization, and it's a membership organization. So if any of you are in organizations, you can join IUCN. Now IUCN is unique in the sense that you have state members. We have state members as well as NGO and CBO members. So we're a negotiating space where governments can actually talk to civil society, and that is quite unique in the world. So Rwanda has become a state member, and we have other members in Rwanda who are NGOs, some international NGOs. Wildlife Conservation Society, for example, is a member of IUCN. And increasingly, community and other organizations are becoming members of IUCN. So if you want to join, please do. And we're now starting a program with Rwanda. We're establishing an office and working closely with Rwanda Natural Resources Authority and starting some projects. The funding so far has come from Germany, from UK and from Norway, and we're just starting quite a large German-funded project which is supporting Gatsibo and Gicumbi. Some of the work we're doing is now this assessment work is happening now in Uganda, in Kenya and Ethiopia, but Rwanda has led the work in Eastern Africa, and the picture you see here is the handbook. In fact, John, I think there's a few copies there. Maybe you could just. We could pass one round. Let's pass one round so people can have a look. We have a small number of copies, and maybe we'll leave one with the DFOs. But that handbook also was a product of the Rwanda. So at the same time, we were learning by doing. We were developing the assessment methodology at the same time as we were doing the assessment. So the assessment report that you all have a copy of, the methodology was a product of that work. That forest landscape restoration is not just about forests, and I've heard a lot of your expectations as we recover natural forests, we recover indigenous species, but forest landscape restoration also works in different landscapes, so mosaics of agriculture, of wetlands, of mountains, of forests. So it works in different land uses. Oh, now you can watch a small video from China. So this is the Loess Plateau, has put a lot of effort into restoring that landscape. Now interestingly, from restoring that landscape, the food productivity has increased a lot. So they built a lot of terraces, and this is quite similar to the work in Rwanda, and you can see the natural vegetation on the steep slopes and then the food crops. And from these very degraded landscapes, they've done a lot of work in restoring both the ecosystems, the social fabric. So restoration is proven. It's been a proven exercise in different countries, and China is a good example. So more trees doesn't always mean more benefits. If we just have monocultures of single species like this oil plantation, it doesn't necessarily bring multiple benefits to multiple people. This is forest landscape. This is Tanzania. This is the area of Tanzania, Shinyanga, that once was called the desert. In fact, I think it was Mwalimu Nyerere who called Shinyanga the desert of Tanzania. And the benefits was 500,000 hectares of new forests. And there was a further 1.5 million hectares of agroforestry. And that, in terms of carbon, this happened before our current concern about carbon and storing carbon and capturing carbon. But it captured 42 million. Now the method they use, interestingly, what they also restored was the cultural practices. So in Shinyanga, the communities there have a land use called Ungatili. Ungatili is a mixture of savanna and grassland and forest mixed together. And so they restored the cultural system, and they restored the institutions that managed that, and so they restored the forest. But also, what else happened? Here's a picture of a school. So they found that there was improved food security, that children stayed in school longer because they weren't having to, the families were better off so they could invest in education a bit more. Women were empowered by the process, and incomes in those households were $14 per person per month, compared with the national average of $8.5 per month. So there were multiple benefits. So sometimes when we say we have environment on one side and development on the other, I think we miss the story. If we have healthy environments, as Jean was saying, then we have healthy communities and enriched communities. And this is not only happening in Tanzania, in Rwanda, but here's an image from Ethiopia just showing a landscape that has been restored. WRI, World Resources Institute, produced a map of the potential for restoration across the world. And here's some of the statistics is that if we restore 150 million hectares, now the Bonn challenge is that target to restore 150 million hectares. If we do that during this present decade, we could deliver $84 billion a year in benefits to local and national communities. So we're not talking small benefits here. We can sequester, we can capture and store an additional 2 gigatons of carbon, whatever that might be. I don't know. I don't understand these things. Gigatons. A lot. I think that's a lot of carbon. Committing to, in terms of climate change, and what we need to do to prevent dangerous climate change. So restoration can be a significant support to avoiding dangerous climate change. And we can also increase crop yields by 30% on after 50 million hectares. So globally, the restoration agenda is quite important. So some of the challenges met with on the local level are local harmonization between local policies and institutions. So sometimes we know institutions compete with each other rather than collaborating with each other. So we need to have a new type of working together which looks at the common goal of restoration, and we work very closely together. So it's really, I think, very exciting in this room. We have FAO, we have Rwanda Agricultural Board, And without forestry and agriculture in Rwanda really working together, I think we won't succeed. So that's really exciting that we have those institutions. And forestry and agriculture have in the past been seen as antagonistic in many countries. But I think those days need to be over. We need to really work very closely together because in different parts of the landscape, we need the forest for the water catchment, we need the agricultural land, we need the agroforestry trees for soil fertility, so we need each other. So our institutional focus needs to be a bit wider. The other limitation is lack of data on degraded lands, on natural resources, and on livelihoods. So this work has been trying to resolve some of those issues. So now I'm coming to the report, and the question was, how can, at the national level, how can we develop a cost-effective strategy for restoration? And this is what the document is trying to set out. Now this is at the national level, and so where we're thinking about now is now starting to think at the district level. How do we do this at the district level? So in presenting the national, you could be thinking about, okay, how do we translate this into the district level? So the restoration did a number of things. It did analysis in terms of geographic analysis and maps. It did economic analysis, but very importantly, it also consulted with stakeholders. So there was a series of stakeholders workshops around the country which then provided stakeholder input and also validated. Agroforestry on steep slopes, agroforestry on gentle slopes, woodlots, and then protective forests. So these forests are those forests that protect ecosystem function. So maybe they're on very steep ridge tops, which need to be protected from landslides. They could be along rivers to protect the river. The protective forests are helping the ecosystem function, watershed protection, preventing disasters in terms of floods, providing resources during maybe drought periods, and then finally natural forests. And we heard also there's quite a lot of interest in restoring our natural forests and our biodiversity and our native species in our visions. And Rwanda is a very highly diverse country in terms of animal and plant species, but we know that these are now restricted to some relatively small areas of forests, like Parc de Volcan, like Nungwi. But I think what we've seen is that there is also, spread around the country, there's also remnants, other remnants that we can be the basis of restoring natural vegetation, and I think not just only forests but wetlands, savanna, wooded bushland. So there are other habitats that we can look at. So what are the key findings of this report? One is agroforestry is the pillar, is the main pillar of restoration, with a potential of 1.1 million hectares, and that's 45% of the country. So it's a very big potential. We can now see, as we do our planning, whether we can expand that map from the national assessment to the district level. In fact, I didn't mention this when I was describing the overall 5 interventions. Woodlot improvement was another very critical area. Now, personally, having now started to get to know Gatsibo and Gicumbi, this might be not quite an accurate picture. I think there are resources in the two districts which have potential for restoration. The landscape here's a representation on the closed landscape with the buffer. We see agroforestry on flat lands and the lakes with protective forests, and we can see potential for woodlots, and the red is the very steep slopes. So we can see in a sort of visual representation, it's one important thing to note that this is not a land use plan. This isn't a land use plan, it's more like a vision, it's more like a potential. If you're going to do a land use plan, you need to do a lot of groundwork, you need to do a lot of stakeholder consultation. And I personally am not so familiar with the land use planning process in Rwanda, but this would be good information for a land use plan. So, there was a lot of recommendations coming out of here, so I'll end up by going through some of the recommendations. So one of the things was important was to improve institutional coordination, and the recommendations talked about the joint sector working group, working on plans and master plans, provision of technical services. So I think at the district level we can start to think, how can we improve institutional coordination at the district and the sector level. For example, I have heard that sometimes one institution will do a lot of support for planting trees in a landscape, and then a bit later another institution comes in and says, let's build terraces, and they destroy all those trees in the process. So it's better we start with the organising, doing the terracing first, and then the tree planting afterwards. So we need to have that good coordination on terms of sequence. Another recommendation is on the improving the delivery and technical know-how on the planting stock. So the trees, we're going to need to have a good variety of trees of high quality, and therefore there needs to be a lot of work done there. And so the tree seed centre becomes very important there, and how that is managed, and whether we can actually purchase some seed from other countries. And importantly, I think, is our network of tree nurseries. If we can really upgrade the number, the production, the quality, the variety of species of tree nurseries, that will be very important. And also we need to try and incentivize, or to try and provide good incentives, good encouragement for people to plant indigenous native trees. And there may be some ways to do that, maybe financial. We may be looking at cultural incentives, because trying to relearn our indigenous knowledge and pass it on to the next generation, maybe through indigenous tree planting in school compounds, in churches and other institutional spaces, so we can start to bring up. We need to help increase farmers' return, financial return from tree products on farms, linking them more closely with the markets. We need to have technological packages, restoration packages which are designed for individual farmers. We need to have a good extension service that supports that process. And another recommendation is prioritise and support the early application of forest landscape restoration in selected landscapes. And so this is where we are now coming to the district level, is that support early action in different districts, including Gicumbi and Gatsibo, and the priority landscapes. So that's a summary of the recommendations for next steps. High quality planting stock, increased local demand for trees and restoration products, improved coordination, early action in priority landscapes, which is what we're starting, and mobilisation of different financial resources at lots of different scales to make this happen. And I think we're in a particularly important point in world history. We have been removing forests. Piece by piece we've been removing forests. So we've come to the point where we've destroyed half the forest that ever existed on the planet. Now we're at the point where we have to turn that around and we start going back the other way. It's a very long journey, but I think we're the generation that is turning that around from the forest loss to the forest recovery and gain. So we have important work. Thank you very much.